Kia ora, I'm Jeffrey Clark, Chief Executive of Gas New Zealand. Welcome to GasNZ's first Lunch and Learn event. This is going to be a series of short online forums throughout the year, covering topics that are of interest to GasNZ member companies and their staff. Some of them are going to be presentations like this one, some will be panel discussions, and the plan is that in each session there'll be a chance for you to ask questions and contribute your comments. Again, sometimes that'll be online, sometimes that'll be interactively. So in today's session, we're going to be using the Q&A button. So if you've got a question or comment, please just hit the Q&A button up the top and send it through to us. The plan is that Lunch and Learn is going to be a way for you to hear about new developments and discuss subjects that you want to know about. So we're really keen to make them relevant and topical. If you've got suggestions for something that you'd like us to cover in a future session, please do just get in touch. So today's first Lunch and Learn session is about LPG liquid burns, cold burns. They require specific first aid treatment to reduce the impact from them. And this session is held to mark the release of the GasNZ Burns card, which is designed to give quick and accurate first aid guidance and be available for you to use. The session today is hosted by Louisa George and Sarah Capax, both of whom have deep experience in keeping our people safe at work and ensuring they go home safe and well. As many of you will know, Louisa is the chair of the GasNZ Health and Safety Committee, and she's the Safety and Wellness Partner at Genesis, where she's been in health and safety roles there since 2016. And Sarah has been Health and Safety Manager at Claris for the past 2 years, and before that was Health and Safety Manager at Downer for over a decade. So they're both really well positioned to run this session for us today. So really looking forward to hearing more about LPG liquid burns and first aid. Over to you to start, Sarah.
Jeffrey, I'll kick it off. Hi
okay,
everyone,
sorry.
Kia ora koutou, it's Louisa here. Before we move on to the slide deck, I would like to call out a quick warning. On the second slide in, we do have a couple of small images showing LPG liquid cold burns, which are a little bit gruesome, not too bad. However, those who are faint-hearted may wish to avert their eyes. Moving on to slide number 2. As we all know, LPG poses a significant risk when it's not handled safely and correctly. And cold burns from exposure to liquefied gas are a real risk for those handling LPG, in particular our fillers across the industry. Many of you will be familiar with the concept of the bow tie, which we've got shown here in diagrammatic form, with the identified threats and controls, our preventative measures on the left, and our recovery measures mapped out on the right-hand side. Rightly so, the majority of our time and energy is spent on that left-hand side of the bow tie, as it's how we prevent the occurrence of the unwanted event. But it's also important for us to ensure on the right-hand side, the recovery side of the bow tie, that is robust. So if and when we need to respond, we're ready, we can act fast to reduce the impacts of the event occurrence right from that first response. Now, when we looked across Aotearoa and internationally at research on the impacts of cold burns from LPG, one of the findings that stood out in that research was that there appears to be a lack of general awareness in regards to first aid requirements for cold burns. A couple of local examples that have occurred in the last few years and shared through our Health and Safety Committee are summarised here. In the first example, the filler was decanting a gas cylinder and the liquid spilled over part of the filler's hand, causing a cold burn. Unfortunately, the first aid response was inadequate in this case, and the glove that was stuck to the skin of the hand was removed too early, and this led to a degloving of a significant amount of skin from the hand, which in turn has led to quite a lengthy recovery for that person with ongoing impacts. The second example is where a filler received a cold burn with a piece of equipment that malfunctioned unexpectedly. The gas ran out onto the filler's hand, causing a burn which started off as a small patch of damaged skin and grew later into a visibly larger area. Now, in this instance, the filler had water on board his truck and he applied that to the burn, which reduced the injury impact. Thankfully, that filler has no ongoing impacts and the injury has fully healed. I'll hand over to Sarah to take you through the burns card.
Thanks, Louisa. So this slide here shows what the burn card looks like. So on this slide, I've got kind of two key discussion points that I want to go through. Firstly, the purpose of the card and kind of how we came to create it, and then secondly, actually digging into some of that key first aid or other treatment measures following a cold burn. So in terms of the card's purpose, as you would have heard, unfortunately, if a cold burn does occur, the way they're treated can significantly impact the outcome of the severity and the recovery of that burn. So cold burns aren't quite the same as heat-related burns that we're more familiar with. There are a couple of quite specific responses that we need to make sure we put in place that create a slightly different approach when it comes to treatment. So that got us thinking. We turned to other industries to see how similar problems are approached. And by doing that, we reflected on bitumen burns in the roading industry. And so the treatment has some quite specific requirements due to the nature of the product. And because of this, for many years, the industry has had a specific card for people working with bitumen on how to provide first aid and further medical treatment to avoid causing more damage. The worst case scenario is trying to treat someone and actually causing more damage by doing treatment wrong. So that's what we want to avoid. So that prompted us to design something similar for our industry. So the LPG burns card is small and concise. So what we've pictured here is kind of, sort of a credit card sized card, which we're wanting to have available, as well as something bigger. But, a lot of the time we're referring to the small wallet size card. It's small and concise, and it's intended to be distributed to anyone dealing with LPG. So in the case of a cold burn being received, the card should stay with them at all times. So it's nice and small, they can hold on to it, and that includes going through to medical providers if that's required. So having this information is important for first responders to cold burns, but also for those medical practitioners who may not have experienced dealing with a cold burn as well. So the sources for our information came from ANZBA, so that's Australian New Zealand Burns Association, and we actually sought their endorsement for this card, knowing that we took quite a bit of content from them and that we also refer on to them for our medical providers if they want more information. So we wanted to make sure they were on board with that. But we also used information from the GasNZ Best Practice Guide for Safe Handling of LPG, and also from the LPG safety data sheets, which have quite a lot of information on first aid response. With these sources, there were some variations in minor details, but we really tried to keep the content as consistent as possible for this card. So the second thing I wanted to cover talking to this slide was around actually some more specifics of first aid. So with the purpose and origin now explained, we also want to use this opportunity as a way to do a quick overview of first aid and treatment required for cold burns. So firstly, it's important to note that cold burns can be deceptive. They're not always obvious right away. The extreme cold can actually numb the area, so the person might not feel pain at the time. So by the time the burn becomes more noticeable to the person, that treatment can be harder and less effective. So that's why we tend to encourage people take a precautionary or a better safe than sorry type approach. So if someone says liquid LPG has touched their skin or their clothes, then we do want to assume that they could have a cold burn, even if they say they feel fine. If they mention a tingly sensation, that's actually a sign that the burn could be quite severe. So we certainly want to take action if that's the case. So before we go into specifics that are listed on the card, and we'll kind of just bulk out a little bit, also want to note that standard first aid principles also apply. So, that first step of, checking for safety for yourself before you respond is obviously in play. But generally, this card addresses things like, firstly, making sure that we remove the source of exposure. So we want to either remove the person or we want to stop that source of LPG. We talk quite a lot about using water, so this is pretty standard treatment for a burn, but the really specific side of things for this a response is using tepid or warm water. So the guidance is generally use as close as possible to kind of mid 30 degrees to that 40 degrees temperature. Lower temperatures can be less beneficial for tissue survival, while if we go for anything higher than that, then we might produce a burn wound and actually compound the injury. So that's the ideal, as close to that as possible, just to really encourage that the best possible chance of full recovery. But in reality, any clean water is better than none. You know, we still want to be flushing that burn no matter what. In terms of clothing, if clothing is impacting circulation or breathing, then we really want to try and loosen that. But also we need to be really careful with it. We don't want to remove clothing if we don't need to, in case it's frozen or stuck to the skin. So we can just apply that tepid water with the clothing still in place, and that will actually help the clothing defrost as well. While it's not specifically noted on the card because it's kind of not in that direct first aid response, it is worth noting that we need to keep contaminated clothing away from ignition sources because some gas may be given off during the thawing process. We want to make sure that any rewarming is gradual. Active motion of the burnt body part can be beneficial, but we don't want to do any massage or apply any direct heat or cold to the area. So no heat lamps, no ice, any of that type of thing. Giving warm liquids can help. Giving alcohol is a big no-no though, so please avoid doing that. And as with standard practice for burns, covering with a clean, sterile material is the next step. So Glad Wrap is a good option, like often you'll be told about in a first aid course for general burns, also is relevant for this burn response. So again, while not directly called out on the cards, the approach to the liquid LPG splashes into eyes is the same response, just that flushing eyes with water continuously for 15 minutes. And again, that warm or tepid water is preferred for that. Side 2 of the card, you'll see, so that's kind of the left-hand side, which is for the first aid, the immediate first aid. The side 2 of the card is advice for medical practitioners. So there's a bit more technical jargon in there. Again, that's really based on that Australia-New Zealand Burns Association fact sheet. But the key takeaway is for the medical practitioners is not to judge a cold burn by how it looks on the surface, and real damage can be much deeper. The card says that in slightly more technical terms. That medical practitioners will be very au fait with, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. So the reason for that liquids and gases like LPG can penetrate tissue quickly, and it can cause more severe injuries than a typical heat burn. So even if the skin doesn't look too bad at first, the underlying tissue could be quite badly affected. So that's the key messaging for medical professionals. So now I'll hand back to Louisa. She'll be able to talk a little bit more about access to and distribution of the cards for your teams. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And I'd like to call out a big thank you on behalf of all of us in the industry. I love it that you saw a gap in our recovery measures and that you and the team at Claris were happy to share and enable us to adopt the card at the industry level. And as a call out to people who are listening online, I'd like to ask if any of you have thoughts of other initiatives or things that you think your company does really well in that health and safety space that we could use to eliminate or reduce harm and lift the health and safety game across the industry, then please let us know about these so the GasNZ Health and Safety Committee can review these as potential initiatives for the future. And you can share any examples or thoughts with us through emailing GasNZ at the email address info@gasnz.org.nz. And you'll probably be wondering, so what's next with these cards? Another big thank you to GasNZ. They're sponsoring the first batch of the pocket-sized A7 cards, which will be distributed to the members of GasNZ with the aim for everybody who's in a filler role across the motu to have one of these cards. So they tuck it in their pocket, and when they're undertaking filling or other duties that expose them to potential of a cold burn, they have that information right there on the spot. You will be able to purchase additional copies of the A7, A4 size laminated cards through the GasNZ procurement portal. And in addition, from this day on, we'll be incorporating the cards into future orders of the LPG filler training book, the workbook, and the site manager site trainer guides, and also the LPG filler training pack. And all of those training guides and resources can be purchased through the procurement portal on the GasNZ website. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to hand it back over to Jeffrey for the wrap up and any questions. Have we lost Jeffrey?
I think you might have.
Just while we're waiting for Jeffrey to reconnect in, I can see that there's a couple of questions come through. Hi, David. How can we get the Burns cards? Just covered in that last slide there around accessing them through the procurement portal. If you have any problems, do let us know. And another anonymous person's asking about the cards as well. We do have a question about how many cold burn incidents are reported annually in the gas sector. It's really hard to find that information online. I do know that the majority of international data is around exposure to general users or customers. And typically what I've seen in the research for New Zealand is where is largely linked to fatality, which we haven't had that through a cold burn exposure. And so because they're less severe, we don't tend to have that data available for us, which is one of the reasons why it's so important for the Health and Safety Committee, the GasNZ Health and Safety Committee, to be sharing these incidents. A couple of other initiatives that we're working on is capturing incidents that are shareable at the industry level, anonymising the information and making sure we can distribute those learnings in an industry safety alert or shared learning. And we're also looking at collecting and capturing some of that data around injuries that are experienced across the industry. So we've got better visibility of what are some of the problem areas and what are some of the different initiatives we might do at the industry level to focus on either eliminating or minimising those injury events. Hopefully that answers your questions. Please feel free to pop any other questions in there. I can see we've got Jeffrey back on, so I will hand over to Jeffrey.
Yeah, sorry there. It seems that our internet here entirely went down. So I'm calling on I'm connecting on my phone. Great technology. So I take it you answered the questions that were there in the Q&A, Louisa. Excellent. Great. Thank you for that. Look, so if there's no other questions, I can't see any there in the Q&A. Thanks very much for the Health and Safety Committee for taking this initiative and putting these cards out there, and B, for the 25 people who've dialed into the session. It's great to have these. As I say, we're hoping to have these quite frequently, and we're happy to set lunch and learn sessions up in response to topical issues that are going on. So if there's anything you think of that you think you and your staff would like to have a discussion about, either by way of presentation or a more open discussion where we have two-way communication, then let us know and we'll set something up. So Louisa, Sarah, thank you very much for this today. And oh, hang on, there's another person here saying great start to the webinar series. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and go off and enjoy the rest of your lunch break.
Thanks very much. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.